I escaped my abusive parents. At 17, slept in a truck for 2 years, clawed my way to owning a home. Then my family showed up at my door, demanding I hand it over because family comes first. The moving truck was already in my driveway when I pulled up. I sat in my car for a full minute just looking at it. A white flatbed, engine still running. 2 men I'd never seen carrying my neighbor's sectional. No, wait, that was my couch. The green one I'd bought at the Habitat for Humanity Restore in Clarksburg 3 weeks ago for $85. They were carrying it into my house. My front door was wide open. Marcus was standing on the porch. He had his thumbs hooked in his belt loops, and this grin on his face I'd seen 100 times growing up, the one that meant he'd already won and he wanted me to know it. He gave me a small wave, not a greeting, a dismissal. I didn't get out of the car. Dana appeared in the doorway behind him, arms crossed over her belly, and looked me up and down the way a person looks at something they're deciding whether to throw away or keep. She said, "It's okay. Your mommy said we could." I locked my doors. I pulled out my phone and called 911. Dana came off the porch fast. She got to my driver's side window and started pounding on the glass with the flat of her hand, screaming that I needed to hang up. Screaming that she was pregnant and I was stressing her out. Screaming that if I didn't open the door, she was going to put a rock through my windshield. The emergency operator heard all of it. I kept my voice steady. I told the operator my name. I gave her my address, 4 Ridgemont Court, the address I had signed for 6 weeks ago, the address that was on my mortgage, the address that was finally, for the first time in my 32 years on this earth, mine. I told her my family had entered without my permission and appeared to be moving furniture into my home. She told me to stay in my vehicle. She said units were on the way. I sat there watching Dana scream and watching Marcus watch me and watching 2 strangers carry my belongings around like they were already his. I had worked for this house for 2 years. I had worked for it longer than that, if you're counting everything it took just to get to the point where I could work for it at all. I need you to understand who these people are before I tell you what happened next, because on the surface, what I just described sounds insane. It is insane, but it didn't come from nowhere. Nothing like this ever does. I was born in Wheeling, West Virginia, second child to Ray and Connie Marsh. Marcus is 14 months older than me. Growing up, that gap felt like a canyon. Marcus got the good clothes, the school lunches, the birthday parties. I wore what fit. I ate what was left. I don't say that to be dramatic. I say it because it was a pattern, and patterns matter. By the time I was 8 and Marcus was 9, the shape of our household was already fixed. He was the one they were proud of. I was the one they tolerated. The physical stuff started around that same age. I won't inventory it. What I'll tell you is that my grandmother, Nana Ruth, figured it out before anyone else did. She lived 40 minutes away in Moundsville, and she visited when she could. One Sunday when I was 10, she showed up unannounced, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with a bruise across my cheekbone that I'd told Marcus I got from falling off my bike. Nana Ruth looked at it for about 2 seconds. Then she looked at my father, and she slapped him across the face hard enough that the sound echoed. She told him she'd handle it herself if he didn't stop. She meant it. My father knew she meant it. For 3 months, things were different, quieter. My father got careful. My mother followed his lead, as she always did. Then my father got a job offer in Columbus, Ohio, and we moved. Just like that. We were packed and gone inside of 3 weeks, far enough away that Nana Ruth couldn't drop by anymore. Far enough away that the careful version of my father could quietly retire. I was 10 years old and I understood exactly what was happening. I just couldn't do anything about it. The years in Columbus were the worst. I don't think distance was the only thing that changed. I think they felt free in a way they hadn't before. I was 12 when I first started keeping a bag packed under my bed, not because I had anywhere to go, just because having it there made me feel like I had a choice. I was 17 the night. Everything broke open for good. Marcus was on the phone with Nana Ruth. I could hear him from the hallway, that smooth, practiced voice he used when he was performing, telling her I was doing great, telling her school was going well, telling her we were all happy. I don't know what came over me. Some combination of exhaustion and rage and the specific kind of despair that builds up when someone tells the same lie over and over about your life. I walked into the room and I started screaming into the phone. I told her he was lying. I told her they were still hitting. I told her everything I'd kept quiet for 7 years. Marcus hung up, just reached over and ended the call without a word. Then he walked down the hall to find my parents. That night they beat me until I passed out. I came back to consciousness in the bathtub, Water cold enough that my fingers had gone stiff. They hadn't called anyone. They hadn't checked on me. They had just left me there. I was 17 years old, lying in cold water in a bathtub, and I understood with complete clarity that no one in that house was ever going to protect me. I dried off. I packed the bag that had been waiting under my bed for 5 years, and I walked out the front door into the dark. The years after that were long in the way that hard years are long each day, the full weight of it, no momentum carrying you forward. I slept in doorways in Columbus for about 2 months before a woman named Carol, who ran an outreach program in the short north, got me into a transitional shelter. I was there for 7 months. I got a GED. I got a job bussing tables at a place called Marcello's on High Street, $6 an hour plus tips, and I worked every shift they gave me. I aged out of the shelter system at 18 and spent the next year couch surfing. I'm not going to make it sound survivable through grit alone. A lot of luck was involved, and a lot of kindness from people who had no reason to be kind. A woman I worked with named Sharita let me sleep on her couch for 4 months when I had nowhere else to go. I've never forgotten that. I was 23 when I finally had a real apartment, a studio in Hilliard, $610 a month, thin walls, a radiator that made noise like it was suffering. It was the most beautiful place I'd ever lived. I started therapy at 24 through a community health center that operated on a sliding scale. I paid $8 a session. That therapy rewired me in ways I'm still discovering. It gave me language for things I'd only ever felt, as conditions I moved through without names. My therapist, a woman named Dr. Aguilar, was the first person who ever said the words, "That wasn't your fault," directly to me about my childhood. I cried so hard I couldn't drive home. I sat in the parking lot for 45 minutes. I worked my way up from bussing tables to serving to shift supervising. I got a second job doing weekend warehouse work in Obetz. I saved. Slowly, steadily, I was building something. Then March 2020 hit, and the restaurant closed overnight, and the warehouse cut shifts by 70%. And my apartment building went condo, and my landlord sent me a buyout letter I couldn't afford to refuse or accept. In the space of about 6 weeks, I lost the job, the apartment, and most of my savings. What I had left was my truck, a 2014 Chevy Colorado I'd paid off the year before, and a beat-up camper van I'd bought for $3,200 from a guy in Lancaster who'd used it for fishing trips. I converted the van into a livable space over the course of 2 weeks. I parked at state park campgrounds when I could, truck stops and Walmart lots when I couldn't. I worked remote logistics dispatch from my laptop. I kept every expense I could cut. I rebuilt my savings from basically zero, slower this time, because the world had slowed with me. After about 8 months of this, I made a calculation I'm not fully proud of. I needed land to park on, a real address for work, for mail, for stability. Renting a space at an RV park was $650 a month minimum in my area, and that money felt like it should be going toward the down payment I was still chasing. I thought about my options for a long time. Then I called my father. I was 30 years old. I had been gone for 13 years. I called him, and when he answered, I said I needed a place to park my van, and I was willing to pay for it. He let me talk for about 45 seconds. Then he chuckled this low, dismissive sound I'd spent my childhood flinching at, and he said, "Well, the worms come back to beg for dirt." I didn't hang up. I should have. I knew what I was walking into, and I went anyway, because I was tired, and the math made a kind of brutal sense. My mother's condition, communicated through Marcus the following week, was $2,000 a month for a parking spot on their lawn. They had a half-acre in a suburb of Columbus, nothing special, and they were charging me more than some people pay in mortgage. I knew it was punitive. It was designed to be. But I also knew what I made, and I knew what I was saving toward, and I ran the numbers, and I said yes. I moved the van onto their grass in November 2020. Living there was an exercise in swallowing things. Dana made comments about the van almost daily, about my clothes, about the hours I kept. Marcus would appear at my window some mornings just to remind me that my rent was due that week, as if I had ever once been late. My parents treated me like I was a boarder who hadn't paid his deposit present, but unwelcome, tolerated as a transaction. I kept my head down. I worked. I saved. 14 months after moving onto their property, I got promoted to operations supervisor at the logistics company. The salary bump was $11,000 a year. I had been saving aggressively, and the promotion finally put me over the threshold I'd been calculating toward for 2 years. I found the house in February 2022 on Zillow. Three-bedroom manufactured home on a quarter-acre lot in a small community called Ridgemont Estates, 2 miles from my office. Listed at $134,000. It needed cosmetic work. The carpet in 2 of the bedrooms needed replacing, the exterior paint was peeling badly, and one of the bathroom faucets dripped, but the structure was sound and the lot was flat and the neighborhood was quiet. I lowballed them, made an offer at $124,000 with a 10-day close. The sellers counter-offered at $128,000. We settled at $124,500. I paid $6,200 in closing costs and put $7,500 down. I signed the mortgage documents on March 3, 2022 and got the keys March 14th. I did not tell my family, not a word. The mistake I made was 2 weeks later. I had started to feel safe. That's the only explanation I have. After everything, safety can make you do careless things. I posted on Facebook a single photo of my front porch with the caption, "First home, finally mine." I tagged my location without thinking. I wasn't even friends with my parents on Facebook, but Marcus was, and Marcus still talked to people I'd grown up with who were. 3 weeks after the post, on a Saturday morning in April, my doorbell rang. All 5 of them were on the porch. My parents, Marcus, Dana, 8 months pregnant, and their 3 kids, ages 7, 5, and 2. They pushed past me before I said a word. My mother ran her hand along the kitchen counter and said nothing. My father walked room to room like he was assessing a property. Dana looked at the ceilings and said, "Not bad for a cheap place." I stood in my own kitchen and felt 13 years of work suddenly very fragile. Marcus pulled me into the hallway. He had his serious voice on the one he used when he was pretending to be reasonable. He told me he was glad I'd found something. He said it looked nice. He said, "But you've got to be realistic. 3 bedrooms for 1 person is a waste." He said Dana was expecting again, and they were crowded, and this kind of space was exactly what a growing family needed. He said I was single, I was mobile, I could easily go back to the van. I asked him what exactly he was proposing. He told me. All of it, with a specificity that told me he'd thought it through before they drove over. They would take the master bedroom and the second bedroom for the kids. I could have the van parked in the backyard. I'd need to text an hour before entering the house to use the kitchen or the bathroom. I was not to bring anyone inside without Marcus's prior approval. They would handle their own utilities, but I would continue covering the mortgage since it was in my name. He was still talking when I started recording on my phone. He listed out redecorating plans. Dana wanted to repaint the living room. They'd be replacing the carpets. They intended to put up a fence along the back property line. He mentioned that I should start moving the van around to the back before the end of the week so they'd have time to get settled before Dana's next OB appointment. When he finished, he extended his hand and asked when they could start moving in. I looked at his hand. I looked at his face. I said, "Hell no." The room came apart. Dana started crying and screaming simultaneously, her hand pressed to her belly, saying I was going to cause her to miscarry. My mother told me I was selfish. My father started a speech about what family sacrifice actually looked like, how everything he'd done was for the family, how I needed to think about what I was taking from those children. The 2 older kids stood in my hallway, looking scared and confused, and I felt a complicated grief about that because they were innocent and they were watching their parents perform for them. Dana stepped toward me. She was close enough that I could see the specific anger in her eyes, and then she swung, caught me on the left cheekbone. Not hard enough to do damage, but hard enough to hurt. Marcus grabbed her before she could swing again. I held up my phone. I have all of this recorded. I need everyone to leave right now. My mother started to respond. I said it again. Leave. Now. They left. I stood in my kitchen for a long time after the sound of their car disappeared. Then I called a locksmith and had the locks changed that afternoon. I thought it was over. It was a Wednesday when I found out it wasn't over. A woman named Patrice, who lived 2 doors down, knocked on my door around 6 in the evening. She was in her 50s, retired, the kind of neighbor who noticed things. She told me a woman had been by 3 times that week while I was at work, going around the outside of the house, trying windows, writing something down in a notebook. I didn't know what to do with that information. I thanked her and went inside, and I turned it over for 2 days. Then on Friday, I came home to the moving truck. When the police arrived, 2 officers, one named Reyes, one I didn't catch, they found the front door locked. Not just locked. The lock had been drilled out and replaced with a new hardware set, a Schlage deadbolt still in its packaging box, sitting on the porch next to a Harbor Freight drill. Marcus emerged from inside holding a stapled packet of papers. He handed them to Officer Reyes with the practiced confidence of someone who had rehearsed this. It was a rental agreement, 3 pages. It listed the property at 4 Ridgemont Court. It listed my name as the property owner and his name as tenant. It listed a rent of $300 per month, and it bore a signature in the tenant line that was supposed to be mine. I told the officers I had never signed it. I told them the signature was forged. Marcus told them I had agreed verbally and then changed my mind because I was mentally unstable. He used that phrase directly, mentally unstable. Officer Reyes looked at the signature. He looked at me. He asked me to sign my name on a piece of paper from his notepad. They didn't match, not even close. Dana stood to the side with her arms crossed, radiating the certainty of someone who had been told they were going to win this. That was when my mother stepped forward. She looked at Officer Reyes and she said, in the most composed voice I had ever heard her use, that I had a history of mental illness going back to my teenage years, that I had been institutionalized twice, that the family had documentation of my episodes, that the house itself was purchased with money my father had provided as a loan, and that I had agreed to let Marcus and his family live there as a condition of that loan, and that I had a psychiatric condition that caused me to forget agreements and commitments. None of it was true, not a single word, but she said it like she'd been saying it her entire life. And standing there watching her, listening to the precision of the lies, I finally understood something I should have understood years earlier. This was not impulsive. This was not desperation. This had been planned. The visits to the property, the forged lease, the psychiatric backstory. Someone had sat down and constructed this. Probably more than one someone. I felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. Officer Reyes asked me to step to the side while he spoke to my family separately. I stood by my truck and I opened my phone and I called the one person I should have called 2 weeks ago. Nana Ruth. She was 78 years old and still sharp as glass. I hadn't spoken to her since before the pandemic, and when she answered and heard my voice, she said, "I wondered when you'd call." I talked fast. I gave her the outline, the house, the lease, my mother's claims about mental illness and loans. She was quiet the whole time. When I finished, she said, "Your father never gave you a dime. Not one. I know because I'm the one who tried to." I said, "What do you mean?" She said that after we moved to Columbus, she'd sent $200 a month through the mail addressed to me personally, every month, from the time I was 11 until I left at 17. I had never seen a single envelope. I sat down on the curb in front of my own house. She said she had bank records going back to 1999. She had confirmation receipts. She said she had assumed I'd received it and chose not to acknowledge it, and that had put distance between us, and she had carried that hurt for years. My father had been intercepting her money for 6 years. 6 years of letters addressed to me, opened by him, cashed because Nana Ruth had sent checks made out to me, and he'd either forged my endorsement or found another way to deposit them. I would have to verify the details later, but the core of it was immediate and undeniable. The money my parents had been using to establish financial involvement in my house, the loan my mother had just described to a police officer, was actually stolen from an 11-year-old kid by his own father. I walked back over to Officer Reyes. I told him I needed him to hear something before he made any determinations. I called Nana Ruth back on speaker and asked her to repeat what she'd told me. She did, clearly, with dates, with dollar amounts. $200 a month, November 1999 through September 2006. She said she had documentation and would provide it to anyone who needed it. Marcus's expression changed for the first time all evening. It went through several things: fast, surprise, calculation, and then something that looked a lot like fear. My mother stared straight ahead. Officer Reyes looked at the rental agreement in his hand. He looked at my family. He looked at me. He said, "This property belongs to you, correct? Your name is on the mortgage?" I said yes. He looked at Marcus. He said, very evenly, "You're going to need to leave the property." Dana said they had rights, that a signed agreement was a signed agreement. Officer Reyes said the signature appeared inconsistent with the property owner's signature and that the agreement would need to be reviewed. He said if they did not vacate voluntarily, they would be arrested for trespassing. Marcus said they weren't going anywhere. He said that to a police officer, out loud, in front of 2 witnesses. I looked at my brother. I had spent so much of my life being afraid of him, not because he was physically threatening, but because he'd always been the one with standing, with credibility, with my parents at his back. And standing there, I realized I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I'd crossed into something else on the other side of fear. I said, "Marcus, this is my house. I bought it. I paid for it. My name is on the deed. You forged my signature on a document and broke into my home with a power drill. And I have all of it recorded." I took a breath. "I'm done being the thing your family uses when it needs something. We're finished." He started to respond. I turned away from him and told Officer Reyes I wanted them removed. They removed them. The following 2 weeks were the kind of exhausting that lives in your body. My parents called from 3 different numbers until I blocked all of them. My father left a voicemail that was 9 minutes long and contained a threat about property lawyers that I forwarded to my own attorney. My aunt, my mother's sister, a woman named Deb, who I hadn't spoken to in 15 years, texted me to say that what I'd done was shameful and that Dana was having a high-risk pregnancy and I needed to think about those children. I texted back once. "They broke into my home and forged my signature on a legal document. If Dana needs support, Marcus should provide it." Deb didn't respond. Marcus hired an attorney. I learned this from my neighbor Patrice, who had apparently spoken with one of the moving men, who had told her that the family had a lawyer and a plan. The attorney sent a letter claiming that verbal agreements were enforceable, that the rental agreement reflected a legitimate arrangement, and that my family would pursue legal action if I did not honor the terms. My attorney, a housing attorney named Greg Follis, out of Worthington, who charged $180 an hour and was worth every cent, reviewed the letter and told me not to worry. He said the forged signature was our strongest card. He said we should also begin documenting the financial exploitation angle, meaning Nana Ruth's intercepted payments, because depending on how it developed, it could support a broader fraud claim. Nana Ruth sent me copies of everything: 38 canceled checks, bank statements, a letter she had written to my father in 2003 asking why I hadn't acknowledged receiving the money, which my father had apparently never answered. I sat at my kitchen table one evening reading those checks. 38 envelopes, 38 months of $200 sent to a kid who needed it and intercepted by a man who decided his child's suffering was an acceptable resource. I did the math. $7,600, plus whatever had been sent after 2003 that I was still accounting for. Money that should have been mine when I was 11, 12, 13, when I was wearing torn clothes to school and going hungry some evenings and carrying around a packed bag because I was afraid of my own family. I cried. Not for the money. For the kid who hadn't known anyone was trying to reach him. Marcus's attorney went quiet after Greg sent a response letter outlining the forgery evidence and referencing the intercepted funds as potential grounds for additional claims. We never heard from the lawyer again after that. Whether Marcus couldn't afford to continue, or whether the attorney told him the case was unwinnable, I don't know. I prefer not to know. My parents made one final attempt. My father showed up at my office. He sat in the parking lot for 3 hours and then left without coming inside. I watched him on my phone through the building's exterior camera feed. He sat in that car and eventually he just drove away. I'm not sure what he was waiting for. Permission, maybe. Some version of me that was still desperate enough to give it to him. I've been in this house for a little over 3 years now. The carpet in the second bedroom got replaced. I did it myself over a long weekend in the fall, pulling staples and laying pad and snapping laminate into place until my knees ached. I repainted the exterior a deep green that I picked because I liked it, not because I had to justify it to anyone. I have a garden on the east side of the house with tomatoes and peppers and a fig tree that I was told probably wouldn't survive the Ohio winters, and that has now survived too. Nana Ruth came to visit last spring. She was the first family member who ever set foot in this house with an invitation. We sat on the porch and drank iced tea, and she said she was proud of me. I told her I was sorry it took me so long to call. She said, "You called when you could." I don't have contact with my parents. I don't have contact with Marcus or Dana. I heard through someone who still knows the family that they eventually got a place outside of Reynoldsburg, a rental, 3 bedrooms, about what they wanted when they showed up at my door demanding mine. I don't know if they're happy there. I don't know if happiness is a category that applies to them. What I know is this. When I was 17 and soaking wet in a bathtub and completely alone, I made a decision. Not a dramatic one, not a brave one, really. Just the decision that what I was in the middle of was incompatible with survival, and that I had to get out of it even though I had nothing and nowhere to go. Everything I have, this house, this life, this quiet, is downstream of that decision. My family showed up at my door believing that proximity to struggle makes a claim, that because they had been there in the bad years even as the cause of them, they were entitled to the good ones. That family comes first means family is owed first. I understand the psychology of it now. It's a way of thinking that gets passed down the same way everything else does. It doesn't make it less of a lie. Family doesn't come first. People who treat you with decency come first. People who protect you when you're small. People who send $200 a month to a kid they're worried about and wait years for a thank you that never comes and still answer the phone when he finally calls. I still think about the version of this that didn't happen, the one where I opened the door that Saturday morning and said yes, where I went back to the van, where I let them have what I'd built because I was still the person I'd been at, 17, convinced that there was something I owed them, some debt I was carrying that I couldn't name or calculate or ever fully pay off. I know what was lost in all of this, not just the relationships, those were mostly fiction anyway. I mean the thing a person loses when they accept, clearly and finally, that the people who should have loved them chose not to. That's a real grief. It doesn't resolve neatly. I don't expect it to. But I slept in my house last night in a bed I own, in a room I painted the color I wanted, and the lock on my front door is one I chose. That is not nothing. That is everything.